Let's see how much Pokemon lore you actually know, like the story from X and Y about a horde of faceless men. There's a theory that that's a tale about Zygarde. It is good to be back. I have spent way too much time over the last 10 years thinking about Pokemon lore to not compile everything I know about both the canon of Zygarde and then all the speculation and theories I've heard over the last 10 years in one video and give it to you. You'll be a Zygarde expert by the end of this. Oh, and before the end of my first video as Lorekeeper Toby, see if you can spot all 100 Zygarde cells in this video. That's one right there. Zygarde. We first learnt of the Order Pokemon in X and Y, where it awaited the hero of Kalos at the end of Terminus Cave, a tunnel system that seems to surround the Kalos region, protecting it from outside forces like the Paldea region. It's a guardian Pokemon, a master of Xerneas and Yveltal, the masters of life and destruction. Together, the trio doesn't have an official name, but fans call it the Aura Trio, based on Zygarde's Aura Break ability, which gives it dominion over Xerneas and Yveltal's fairy and dark auras. I remember finishing X and Y for the first time, and there was not a lot of lore about Zygarde in these games. It just sat there at the end of the game as a final boss, its green scales pulsating with light, and a total mystery to us. The Pokédex entries at the time classified it as Pokemon 718, and read that when the Kalos region's ecosystem falls into disarray, it appears and reveals its secret power. It's hypothesized to be monitoring those who destroy the ecosystem from deep within the cave where it lives. What else do we know? Well, it's a dragon and ground type. The dragon is an element common to powerful legendary trio masters, and is actually weak to Xerneas' fairy type, the new type that appeared at the time of Zygarde's creation. Its ground typing also has an interesting interaction with Yveltal, with flying being immune to ground. So while the ability Aura Break has dominion over its subjects, it is also balanced, as it is the balanced Pokemon, weak to them in some respect. The ground typing also makes sense, suggesting a connection to the earth itself, of which Zygarde is a protector spirit. And as you likely know, Zygarde doesn't just come in one shape and form. Introduced for the first time in the animated series and then expanded on in Pokemon Sun and Moon, there are cells of this Pokemon, powerless zygotes that are ever present and hidden to most. They have one big eye with an iris and a second smaller white circle that might be an eye, we're not really sure. They use this to monitor the environment, like little cameras all across the Kalos region, feeding back to central brains, or cores. These cores act as like the mind of the Zygarde, and you're probably most familiar with the red Zygarde from the anime, but you'll also remember if you watch the XYZ arc that there was a blue Zygarde. But in fact, there are 5 different colored cores to Zygarde: red, blue, cyan, orange, and white. Keep note of these colors, they're important for later. These help the Zygarde at 10, 50, and 100% power learn new moves. There's Extreme Speed and Dragon Dance, but then signature moves, 1000 Arrows, 1000 Waves, and Core Enforcer. In terms of cells and cores, they're not truly Pokemon. It only really becomes such at 10% strength, where it takes the form of the wolf. At Zygarde's 10% form, which is obtained from Dexioncina in the Alola's Aether Lab, it effectively wields the power of a legendary Pokemon, or at least 10% of that power, while being able to use its speed and prioritize high mobility to dart across the region to wherever it's needed most. In this way, it's not too dissimilar to the beasts of the Legend of Johto, Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. This form of Zygarde uses its eyes across the region, monitoring the environment, and zips and darts to wherever it's needed to be. In its most regular appearance, the 50% form, it awaits dormantly, storing its power in its burrow den in Terminus Cave. Here, it's able to protect the cores that are within it from enemies. And of course, if you took 2 50% and put them together, or combined 5 cores in one, you would create the 100% perfect form of Zygarde. These cores can be seen inside the chest of Perfect Zygarde, the area it attacks from. This chest is also the face of the 50% Zygarde. What about its actual head and its 4 appendages? Well, these are the hoods that are around the 50% Zygarde. And when we take a closer look at that chest, and we take a look at the colors of the gemstones inside, they are really interesting. The red and blue of the outside colors, as well as its wings, represent, of course, Xerneas and Yveltal, and particularly the box art colors of Pokemon X and Y, the beings of life and death. These two deities control the flow of life and destruction energy in their cycles of sleeping and waking every 800 years from their forms of dormancy in the Tree of Life and the Cocoon of Destruction. It seems that Zygarde's function in the Pokemon world is to be the trio master of these two, the balance between life and destruction, blue and red. But if that's the case, then what about those other colors that I mentioned earlier, cyan, orange, and white? Have you noticed what they represent? Just think about it. Orange, cyan, and white. These are representative not of course, the Pokemon found in X and Y, but different legendary Pokemon found in the next generation. It's representative of the legendary Pokemon and box arts for Pokemon Sun and Moon, Solgaleo and Lunala, with of course the white being Necrozma. That at first seems like nonsensical ramblings of a Loxodon many years ago predicting the end times, but it makes sense that Zygarde, representing order and the Earth, is a gateway between life and death, as well as the other celestial bodies, the Earth, Sun, and Moon. Scientists from Kalos have tracked down the Pokemon and set up an Aether base to study the creature on Route 16 in Alola, and there a scientist is unsure as to what Zygarde is even doing in the Alola region. Its lore ties are typically to Kalos. Well, truthfully, I think that Zygarde acts as not just a trio master, but a quintet master of all of these Pokemon, explaining its spanning across 2 separate generations of games. You know, that or they just forgot to make Pokemon Z. These scientists will give you a special item called the Zygarde Cube. Curiously, it's not a cube shape. It's actually 2 separate shapes that come together that symbolize order and the Earth. This is a machine of odd origins. They don't even know who built it. It is a human-made object, and the scientists in the lab comment that Sycamore is said to have found it. This bit's a little bit more speculation than lore, but it does make sense. I think it follows that if the Zygarde Cube was found in the Kalos region but wasn't created by Sycamore, but is a human-made object, it must have been created by the scientists of Team Flare. They're the only other organization that could have had their hand in it. Perhaps Zygarde was part of their larger plan before their plans were stifled. And then that sort of alludes to the idea that there's only 50% of Zygarde findable in Pokemon X and Y. Perhaps that's because somewhere in the Kalos region they were keeping the other 50% of Zygarde for research purposes in relation to Xerneas and Yveltal. If I had to guess, I reckon Zygarde locked up on the Route 13 power plants in X and Y, but given that we were never able to enter the power plant and they didn't continue with Pokemon Z, I guess we'll never know. In Sun and Moon, however, that 50% of Zygarde that is missing can be found in Resolution Cave, a resolution to the unresolved plot of Terminus Cave, where we find Zygarde with no additional lore. 50% here and 50% there. In 2 rooms that, interestingly enough, look identical in layout. From this, we may be able to deduce that this shape is unnatural, burrowed by Zygarde, to give it access to the 4 corners of any given region it finds itself in. If it were to appear in another region, perhaps it would set up a similar lair. Interestingly, in Terminus Cave, the orbs of the Time-Space Trio could also be located, suggesting a connection with Arceus and the creation pantheon as a whole. But for that, you'd need to see my video on the Arceus concept and how all these legendary Pokemon tie in to the Pokemon pantheon. Zygarde also appears underneath the Crown Tundra in Pokemon Sword and Shield, responding to the Dynamax energy at the heart of the lair, along with many other legendary Pokemon. They seem drawn there by the unusual Dynamax energy, trying to bring balance back to the world as a result of an odd meteorite at the heart of the den. There's another appearance that's worth noting that covers Zygarde's story in great detail, the XYZ arc of the anime, where Zygarde has to fight an abomination copy of itself, forged by Team Flare from the Megalith, the anime's original sort of Mega Stone. It's a giant rock with deep connections to Mega Evolution, and it took this form due to having ingested a Chespin that's been affected by Zygarde's energy, suggesting that the natural energy of Zygarde is connected to Mega Evolution, much like that of Xerneas and Yveltal, the Pokemon that began the phenomenon 3,000 years ago. In this form, the Megalith is corrupted and red, with a core that glows like Origin ore. In ancient times, Primal Groudon and Kyogre battled over this rock, giving Zygarde a connection even to the lore of the Hoenn legendaries. And it is in this state it makes haste for the Anastar City Sundial, a structure that is deeply connected to both Mega Evolution and the mythical Pokemon Diancie. It shares a similar structural quality. With this power, it is Team Flare's hope, in the animated series at least, that order will become disorder and the end times will be brought about by Zygarde's hand. Oh, also, in the Pokemon Horizons anime, the main antagonist uses a shiny Zygarde that seems to show itself in a 10% form. Its story is incomplete at the moment, but we do know it's an ancient Pokemon and it used to take a bigger form, giving up its cells to protect the ecosystem from a special gemstone called Recurium. It's a shiny white and green Zygarde, kind of making it a nice parallel to the heroes who have access to a shiny Rayquaza. The parallels between those two legendaries will become clearer by the end of the video, but there is another legendary Pokemon connected to Zygarde. It's one from the Alola region. Well, not from the Alola region, it's from another universe, from out there in Ultra Space. I'm talking, of course, about Guzzlord. Guzzlord truly is the nemesis. If Zygarde is the order Pokemon, then Guzzlord is chaos. A bestial monster with a stomach of a black hole. It consumes endlessly and unsatiated unless stopped by a heroic trainer like yourself. At first, you might be wondering how this Pokemon could possibly be related to Zygarde, but Guzzlord's designer, James Turner, hinted in a tweet that there's a connection between the two. That if you look at Guzzlord's body, it is very, very similar in structure to that of Zygarde's. A body with a mouth and a face, a smaller crowned head on the top, multiple appendages, both dragon types, and Guzzlord can be found in all places, of course. In Resolution Cave in Sun and Moon, suggesting that, yeah, there's some relation here between the two. So with this, as well as connections to other legendary Pokemon, Xerneas and Yveltal, Groudon and Kyogre, Lunala and Solgaleo, Necrozma, Guzzlord, and perhaps even, speculatively, Terapagos. And if you're not sure how Zygarde fits into this Pokemon pantheon and how it could be related to Terapagos, I really do recommend my video on the Arceus. It's essential viewing if you really want to know what's going on with this Pokemon. With this, all these connections to other legendary Pokemon considered, it puts Zygarde at the heart of a number of Pokemon theories, and that's not even including the lore that we get in Pokemon Legends ZA. But that's enough about the lore. What about the legends? What theories have the Pokemon community come up with over the last 10 years? I've pretty much watched every video, and any that are in writing, I've seen them all. So, here are the legends of Zygarde. Can't you see them behind you? A horde of faceless men? Okay, now you know the lore, but what about the legends? What about the theories that the community's come up with over the last, brace yourself, over 10 years since Pokemon X and Y came out? I'm more of a Pokemon X version person, because I think Xerneas looks really cool, at least on the box, not when you catch it. Pokemon Y, however, is the one that I'm playing at the moment, and yeah, I just want to investigate all of the little things that the community over the last, 10 years have provided when it comes to Pokemon X and Y, when it comes to Zygarde generally. What are all of the theories that are out there? Okay, so effectively, there is this story. There is this story about the tale of the horde of the Faceless Men. And the Faceless Men we don't know what they are. There's nothing in Pokemon that really describes a Faceless Man. There might be some faceless Pokemon, though I can't think of any off the top of my head. But the idea is that there is some Pokemon in Kalos, or some creature in the world of the Kalos games, that could be this horde of Faceless Men. Now, horde is a really interesting word, because with Pokemon X and Y, for the first time, we got horde battles. Or was that Oras? No, it's definitely X and Y. X and Y, we got horde battles, which meant for the first time we could battle up to 5 Pokemon at once. 5 is a horde. So that gives us a clue right away. And I think it was Brandon to the Past was the YouTuber who did this ages ago. There was a video on the idea that what if Zygarde is the horde of Faceless Men? Hear me out here. Let's go on over to Terminus Cave. Let's find ourselves a Zygarde, a coal mine that was closed a few years ago due to rumors of a monster living within it. So even here, a horde of Faceless Men, it's described as like a creature. It's not described as a Pokemon. And the monster living within Terminus Cave is obviously Zygarde, and it's referred to as a monster, suggesting that, again, there's that disconnection from it being a Pokemon, but there being something going on that's like a little bit more supernatural, even for Pokemon's sake. Right, let's get ourselves a Zygarde and see how it could possibly be related to the horde of the Faceless Men. So have you noticed it? Look at Zygarde, or rather above Zygarde, look at its hood. The hood pattern, it's this kind of tall figure that looks almost humanoid in isolation, with 2, what looks to be eyes where the chest might be. No additional details. This is the horde of the Faceless Men. It's also worth noting that when you get told the story of the horde of the Faceless Men, the camera moves towards you like a snake. Dark Break versus Aura Break. Now, this is actually really, really interesting here because Zygarde is this kind of theory number 2 when it comes to Zygarde. Zygarde, the idea is that Zygarde was artificially created to counteract Xerneas and Yveltal. This is a theory put forward by Tyranitar Tube a long, long time ago. I don't know if he made it or whether he just popularized it or what. But the idea of this is that Zygarde is kind of like, actually it's a lot like Rayquaza. They're both giant green serpentine snakes, and obviously there's a lot of ties with both X and Y, and then Auras and the Delta episode. There's a lot of ties to Infinity Energy and Mega Evolution and all the rest. When you look at Rayquaza, it also, much like Zygarde has the Aura Break that breaks both Xerneas and Yveltal's ability, we have Delta Stream, which breaks the abilities of Kyogre and Groudon by removing the weather. But then, of course, the question becomes, hang on, who would make Zygarde? How do you make Zygarde? Is there any evidence for this? Well, yeah. In Pokemon Sun and Moon, Dexio and Cena have an object called a Zygarde Cube. And it's a very artificial-looking cube, and yet it seems to be the thing that binds Zygarde cells together. There's something very inorganic about it, and they say that Professor Sycamore found it. So there is an idea that perhaps there's another scientific body out there in the Kalos region, like perhaps, as I mentioned earlier, Lysander or some old version of Team Flare that actually made it. Perhaps an older version of the organization, because again, another theory by Tyranitar Tube here is that Volcanion, with its supernatural organ, is also an artificial Pokemon. It's not a very official looking Pokemon. Organic. It doesn't look very organic. Another point here for an ancient version of Lysander, or rather one of his ancestors, is that he's part of the royal lineage. He's related to AZ. And if not him and his bloodline, then AZ specifically, as AZ did travel to Hoenn. We see the flower of his floette outside the Cave of Origin. That being the case, then perhaps the reason he went to Hoenn in the first place was to study Rayquaza from the Draconids, to learn to create something very similar for the Kalos region. Something that could counter his own other creation, the ultimate weapon. And again, that was made using the life energy of Pokemon, so it's very likely he knows how to channel that life energy into something organic. Zygarde would keep order and use its eyes across the region to monitor for anyone who might threaten to disturb the peace by awakening the ultimate weapon from below the earth once again. Zygarde is AZ's final creation, his super intelligent contingency plan. I wonder how much damage an Oblivion Wing does here, actually. I should really be trying to catch the Zygarde, but like, let's see. Oh yeah, okay, not bad. And it goes straight for an Earthquake. Do you know what? Scratch the whole theory here, because Zygarde is so stupid it will try and use Earthquake on Yveltal. It clearly has no chance against Yveltal. Master Ball will do it. Okay, so that's Zygarde core. Now, I told you to pay attention to the room, because that leads me on to theory number 3. Its connections to Guzzlord, and this is super fascinating. Ooh, I'm gonna have to swap over to Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Okay, cool. Now, a little bit of a tangent here, because I know I've talked about how like Guzzlord and Perfect Zygarde are very similar in their designs, and obviously you find them in very similar locations across Alola and the Kalos region, but why are they similar? What's the theory there? Well, the idea is that, of course, Guzzlord, being an Ultra Beast, is like a parallel dimension Pokemon. It's from another universe, one that's not too dissimilar from the Pokemon world. Go through the portals at the altar of the Sun and Moon, you can actually travel to effectively Sun version to Moon version to Sun version, and that's why the day and night flips over. But you can also travel through the Ultra Warp Ride to parallel dimensions further off. This part of space is called Ultra Space. And in these spaces, we see people, and we see even like Pokemon, including legendary Pokemon like Mewtwo, who are made by Team Rocket on Earth. So how can that be, and how does Guzzlord fit into that? Well, I think the idea is based on the principle that I'm sure has a name that I don't know, which is effectively, if there is an infinite universe that goes on forever and a finite amount of things that can make up stuff, that being that there's a limited amount of ways that the kind of atoms can arrange themselves, eventually, if you go far enough out into space, you'll find another Mewtwo, another Macargo, another Zygarde, but you're also going to find variations of that. You're going to find Zygardes that are shiny and regular form. And you're going to find creatures that are not quite like Zygarde, but kind of like Zygarde, dark parallel counterparts. I'm talking, of course, about Guzzlord in this instance. And yes, by the way, if that theory is true for how the multiverse works in reality, it means out there, somewhere in the universe, someone else who looks exactly like you, because there's a finite amount of things that can make up the universe, and someone out there that looks like me is making a video that the parallel version of you is watching, and if the universe really is infinitely big, then that has to be happening a bunch of different times. So if you really want to break the mold and not just be like terrified of the existential dread of that, be a little bit different. Be a Guzzlord. Be the one of you that does hit the like button. In fact, please leave the like button and comment. I've been working hard on these videos. Oh, okay, it's a good thing that I have my notes to reference here, because I actually nearly forgot there is a little teeny tiny theory to do with Zygarde, actually, about the 10% form, which of course looks like a dog. So the 10% form didn't come in until the Alola games. I mean, it was introduced in the anime earlier, but it certainly wasn't in Pokemon X and Y. And there's another set of legendary Pokemon here, Type Null and Silvally. See, Type Null was a project by the Aether Foundation designed to combat Ultra Beasts. Maybe it's something we'll get more into down the line when we do a video about Ultra Beasts generally, but it is based on the idea of a chimera being made up of multiple creatures. Now, lots of people have looked at the body parts of this creature and sort of determined that, oh, it might be a little bit Gyarados, it might be a little bit, I don't know, Pidgeot because of the talons. I think what we're seeing here is the 3 Alolan starters, actually. I think we're seeing dark versions of them. Decidueye's talons, Primarina's fins, and then the kind of general body shape with the ears, that's kind of like Litten and Torracat. But there is also the thought here, because the Aether Paradise had access to research materials, because you find Dexio and Cena in an Aether Foundation like little lab on the route that they're on. There is the idea here that perhaps the shape of this Pokemon, it comes from Zygarde, and you can tell that because while Zygarde is a Pokemon that's normally covered in hexagons, you can sort of see on Type Null's back leg like this little hexagonal gap, and when you look inside Type Null's collar, while obviously it's designed to represent Arceus, the shape is very hexagonal. Okay, but there is at least one final theory here to do with Zygarde, and before I jump into that, because I know what you're thinking, you've been staring at my head all day. Toby, where can I get that hat? It's not just the hat, it's the shirt as well. Look at them skulls, aren't they pretty? This is the work of Cuppa Fee, another YouTuber, and of course my lovely girlfriend. I'll leave a link to where you can pick this stuff up in the description. But the big final theory about Zygarde, how does it tie in to Kyurem and Eternatus and Terrapagos and Arceus? Well, for that, you'll have to watch